That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about The Holdovers, the 8th film directed by Alexander Payne, which premiered at the 2023 Telluride Film Festival right before it went to the Toronto International Film Festival. Focus Features is releasing it in limited in New York and LA on October 27th. It will experience a wider release on November 10th, 2023.
Do I know an Alexander Payne movie?
You should know several. I know you've seen, my favorite is his debut, Citizen Ruth, which I know I've shown you.
With Laura Dern?
Oh, yeah. And Tippi Hedren and Swoosie Kurtz. And also Election with Reese Witherspoon and Chris Klein. You saw Sideways, I know, also starring Paul Giamatti. This is a reunion between them. Notably also did About Schmidt with Jack Nicholson. The Descendants with George Clooney. Downsizing was his last film. Oh, in Nebraska with Bruce Dern.
The Holdovers, a cranky history teacher at a prep school, is forced to remain on campus over the holidays with a student who has no family plans. What's your pull quote?
Alexander Payne channels Hal Ashby with his most impressive film in years, a bitchy, bittersweet vintage about unexpected relationships jolting us out of our comfort zones.
My pull quote, strong performances make this overly long, dry comedy easy to swallow. I did really enjoy this movie.
Yeah, I did too.
It does feel long as hell, though. The basic story, so Paul Giamatti is a teacher at this very fancy prep school. So all the kids are rich.
Barton Academy.
And he teaches
ancient civilization.
No one likes him. He's cranky, really strict. He smells like fish. There's that. So over the winter break, it's the end of 1970. Of course, all of these rich kids leave for the holidays to go on their fancy trips, but some have to stay behind for various reasons. And Paul Giamatti, his character, who's also named Paul, is forced to stay and be the one faculty member to babysit these kids. And it's kind of a punishment because Paul failed a student who happened to be the child of a senator. And because this student failed Paul's class, he doesn't get into Yale or Harvard. And of course, the principal of the school had to hear about it. So now the principal's kind of retaliating against Paul. So initially, Paul's supposed to watch 4 students over the break. But there's an additional student, Angus Tully, played by
Dominic Sessa.
He ends up being the main character. He's supposed to leave, but at the very last minute, his mom calls him and says, sorry, we can't pick you up because I need to go spend the holidays with my new husband. We didn't have a honeymoon. So of course he's devastated, but he's left behind. But as you could probably tell from the trailer and the premise, it does end up just being Paul with this one student because one of the other 4 students, his dad shows up in a helicopter and says, I'll take everyone on a ski trip. Paul calls the parents of all of the students and they all say yes, they can go, except Angus's parents because they're too busy having a honeymoon. So then for half the movie, it's just these two in this school with the manager of the cafeteria, played by
Divine Joy Randolph.
Her character's name is
Mary Lamb.
She's also there, stuck behind to feed whomever's left behind. And it's important to know she's a grieving mother. Her son was killed in combat.
In Vietnam.
But he also is a graduate of Barton. And we learned that she actually took the job there in the cafeteria years ago so that she could provide her child with this top-notch education, which makes his death even more tragic. But the 3 of them are just hanging out in this big-ass school by themselves, and it's cold. When on Christmas, the day after Christmas, or Christmas Day, whatever.
There's a Christmas party.
Right, but I'm saying everything culminates in them taking a trip to Boston because Angus wants to go.
That's Christmas Day, yeah.
And Angus kind of tricks Paul because really Angus wants to go so he can see his biological father, who we find out is in a mental institution. So they go and visit. It doesn't go very well. So then the end of the film is holiday break is over. Everyone's back to school. And Paul gets called to the principal's office. and Angus's parents are there, and they're mad as hell because they want to know how the hell did my son end up in Boston and at the psychiatric facility where his dad is, because that's created a bunch of problems because now the dad thinks that he can get out of the mental hospital, and so now they have to transfer him, and it's a deal.
Because the dad doesn't realize that the mother divorced him either.
And is remarried.
Yeah.
So we also find out that Angus, this main student, he's been pulled out or kicked out of a number of schools, and his parents have told him, if we have to pull you out from another school, you're going to military academy. And Angus doesn't want that. And Paul knows that. So when the parents and the principal were like, how did this happen? Paul decides to take the blame. He says, it was my idea. I wanted him to see his dad. So Paul gets fired. And that's the end of the film, is Paul moving on, and Angus doesn't get expelled from school or pulled out. The end.
There you go.
I thought the three main characters, like, I really enjoyed being with them.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think this is a throwback to the films of Hal Ashby, which weren't so much about narrative, but were more about human relationships and unique human relationships, like Harold and Maude, or being there. This one reminds me a lot of The Last Detail with Jack Nicholson and Randy Quaid, where they have to escort that young man that's about to go to military prison or something like that. It feels like these people that are reluctantly thrown together and have to form a makeshift family because they're each lacking in certain ways or have faced some kind of trauma. In this 2-week period, it's kind of like they all have to buck up and provide for one another.
I'm just going to go through my notes. So the 4 boys plus Angus, so 5 boys who are left behind, they're not getting along because 3 of the boys are older, and then 2 are younger, and then one of the boys, whose last name is Kuntz, he's kind of a dick, and they end up getting into a fight, and Paul says, I need to know who started this, and no one wants to speak. So he goes, okay. Paul's character, because of what he teaches, he likes to reference like old-timey things all the time, like historical quotes and actions to justify everything he does.
Lots of things in Latin.
The Romans, and he's like, okay, well, since no one wants to point fingers, then everyone has to suffer. So he's like, every minute that goes by, that's an extra day of detention. So then one of the boys, who happens to be like the little Mormon kid, he's the one who screams, Kuntz did it. And then that causes a tidal wave of problems for him. But I thought the initial period with all the boys was kind of fun.
It is fun. It's kind of like the inverse of something like Dead Poet Society or the History Boys.
Yes. The other younger kid is this little Asian kid. I believe he's from South Korea, is what he says. Mm-hmm. And he ends up wetting the bed and crying.
He's crying at night. Yeah.
I thought that was a really sweet scene because Angus has to sort of console him, and then he tells him, like, just go to bed, I'll take care of your sheets in the morning, but don't let anyone know because they're going to pick on you. I thought that was really sweet because we start to see, because Angus is also kind of a dick.
He is, but it's a response. He's also been kind of cast off and abandoned by his family, which, is a common experience for boys in boarding school.
And it's also important to know Angus is Paul's best student, because we see Paul, the opening of the film is Paul passing out like final exam grades, and everyone does really poorly.
Except for Angus, who gets the highest score, a B+.
A B+. But yeah, Paul, the dialogue for Paul, he's so like, I wouldn't say he's bitchy, but he's
acerbic.
Yes,
sure.
An acerbic, grouchy old man.
He reminds me a lot of, there's a really great Michael Redgrave performance in a film called The Browning Version of this very strict teacher that all these children hate. He was giving me that.
We also find out he has a condition called trimethylaminuria. I had never heard of this. It's the inability to metabolize some body chemical, but it causes the person to smell like fish. So his character really does stink. And then they give him what looks like a lazy eye, which appears to be like a big opaque contact. And in some scenes, you could tell that it was that there's something in his eye. But I thought it was very effective. Because I don't have an opinion of Paul Giamatti. I don't remember Sideways. I remember we saw it at Lexus, the car maker, had an event that was actually very nice. We had like gourmet dinners brought to the car.
It was a drive-through during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, I obviously saw that when it came out, but that was the first time you saw it. And that's a very touching film. I think
Payne is a filmmaker who's really edgy in the 90s, or at least with his first 3 films that kind of became a bit sappy for me. And I think that started, in my opinion, with Sideways. And this is kind of a kickback to somewhere between that and About Schmidt, because it's not overly sentimental, but there are some shades of that.
Yes, especially the ending.
Yes.
But anyway, I don't really know Paul Giamatti because I don't remember Sideways. I just remember the food that was delivered to my car. But I really liked his character and I liked him in it. And I also felt a lot like that character. Not as smart, but like miserable and kind of feeling like, because he talks a lot about being a loner and he prefers that. I really liked his character.
Yes, I mean, he's good as Jerry Heller in Straight Outta Compton. I think this is kind of his best role for me since Barney's Version.
Oh.
Which is really good to check out if you haven't seen that.
The principal has an assistant, Miss Lydia.
Carrie Preston.
Who's so cute. Do I know who that is?
You've seen her. We reviewed something with her recently, but she's probably best known for Claws and or True Blood. But she's kind of filling that Virginia Madsen Sideways slot.
But she's super cute and really sweet to Paul. At one point, she brings him some Christmas cookies, and the way he grabs those cookies for her, like, what the F am I going to do with
that
these?
was...
And then he keeps them, and then, like, what, a week later, tries to pass them off?
He does.
And then when he tastes them, he realizes they're either, like, stale or not good. I thought that was cute.
But that when she initially knocks on the door to deliver the cookies, just the way he said, "I'm busy."
Yeah. He's so annoyed by everything. So at a point, Angus is losing his mind. He does not want to be trapped in this school with old stinky ass Paul. So at one point he like runs from the dinner table, and that's the scene where Paul is chasing Angus. And Paul has this weird walk, like he's almost like flat-footed, so he stomps around. He's not in good physical shape. We get a moment where he tries to throw a football that I thought was really cute. But the scene where Paul is chasing Angus and clearly cannot keep up with them. So Angus, like at every doorway, is stopping to let Paul catch up, and then he runs a little further.
Very tortoise in the hair. Yeah.
Very, very cute. And then we're told that the gymnasium is off limits because the floor is being re-lacquered or whatever. And Angus is like, well, I'm going in the gym. And he runs in and jumps on one of those like boards that gymnasts use to like get on the pommel horse or whatever. And when he lands, he dislocates his shoulder. That was really funny. Then we get a scene with him at the hospital where he has to have his shoulder like put back into place. But before that happens, Paul is scared that he's going to be fired because when he fills out the insurance information, the parents are going to know this happened. And that's when Angus and Paul sort of bond because Angus doesn't want Paul to get into trouble. So he says, he makes some elaborate story about how Paul is his like estranged father and that we're going to pay cash for the services. I thought all of that was very well done.
Yes, they develop a system entre nous.
Then, something that kind of was weird to me is Miss Lydia, the principal's assistant. So she has a Christmas party. So we end up seeing her house, which looks very nice. But we find out that during like winter break and Thanksgiving break, that she likes to pull shifts at like some restaurant as a waitress, a server. I thought that was weird. Does she need money?
A lot of people in education have to do things like that.
Yeah, but then she had a really nice house.
She did. Maybe that's why she did what she was doing to keep it.
I don't know. That felt a little weird to me. Like, seems like something wasn't right with
There
that.
are moments of narrative convenience.
Then while they're at her restaurant, which they don't know she works at, initially we think maybe she's flirting with Paul. We find out that's not the case. She's just a really nice lady because she has a man and he's way better looking than Paul. But it's that same scene where Angus goes to play like pinball and Angus's like arm is in a sling and then he's arguing with some other guys who are trying to play the pinball machine and one of the guys is missing a hand.
He has a hook.
He has a hook and they get to an argument because Angus is like, well, we can both play. You can be my left arm because they're both like incapacitated. And they get mad and then Paul has to smooth it over. But I thought those moments where we see the two bonding made a lot of sense to me. Mm-hmm. However, in the end, when they say their goodbyes, it felt a little corny, like they're a little too emotionally involved with one another.
I get why the final scene or sequence of the film happens because it's as the title would indicate, a movie about people being stuck in a place for too long and being forced to move on. So I get the sense that we want Alexander Payne wants to show these people moving on, if not entirely hopeful, like the possibility of hope. But I really wish it had ended at kind of a beat earlier than it does.
Well, we can talk about that, but getting back to the Christmas party. So at the Christmas party, Angus meets Miss Lydia's niece, and they seem to connect really well. So Angus is saying he's having a good time.
At least the niece.
And then Mary, she's a grieving mother. Like, that's all she can talk about. And she's at this holiday party. The custodian at the school, Danny, he seems to like her. He shows up to the party, gives her a gift. But Mary's sad. She starts drinking, arguing with the guests because she's controlling the music. And she keeps playing the same song that her son liked. So she's a downer.
I think her husband.
Or her husband. And then I think, like, it just went a little too far, because then we see Mary in the kitchen, like, fully drunk, having a breakdown. So they have to leave the party. But then the scene in the trailer where Mary's telling Paul, you shouldn't shame a boy who feels like he's been abandoned. I felt like that felt off. Like, this lady was having a nervous breakdown, and then now she's scolding Paul for being rude. And then I think the scene we don't see in the trailer is that she grabs his arm and goes, let's go. Like, everything's fine. It just feels like a little too...
Again, I think some moments of character and narrative convenience are apparent at moments in this. But we should talk about Mary. We should talk about Divide and Joy Randolph, whose performance I really like.
I really liked her.
Yes.
She felt like a warm hug, kind of.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you know her from Dolomite Is My Name. Just saw her recently as Mahalia Jackson in Rustin, although she doesn't get a lot of room to stretch her wings in that. Yeah, I think let's talk about Mary as a character, because Alexander Payne really hasn't given us a fully fleshed out black character before in his work. I mean, Hong Chow is in Sideways as comedic relief, but...
I felt like... Because Mary's like a supporting character, I almost feel like we get too much of her, because it left me hungry to better understand her character. It's just like she's always there. So when Angus convinces Paul to take him to Boston because it's Christmas, and Paul says, I want to do something for you too. Anything you want, I'll do it. And Angus says, well, then take me to Boston. Then Mary says, well, okay, well, I'm going too. You need to drop me off in Roxbury or wherever so I can go see my sister who's pregnant. And then we get a scene with Mary with her sister, and the sister's pregnant, and Mary's putting away her dead son's baby clothes. It just felt like I'm getting too, like, I'm a voyeur into her life.
Yeah.
But I'm not understanding what she wants. Like, I don't know what this lady needs.
Yeah, it feels like a scene that should have... I get the reason for it, to show this woman in a... like having a moment of respite, right? Like some happiness in her life, because she really doesn't get it. As she says, for wanting to go there and not stay with them in hotels, like, I need a break from you guys and your bickering.
Yeah.
But it also interrupts the flow of the film. So, I mean, if...
Literally, because the scene where we get her on her sister's bed was kind of like, oh, we're here right now? Okay.
I mean, if this had been a first-time filmmaker, that would have ended up on the cutting room floor.
I think the moments with Mary that made the most sense are earlier on, when because she's also stuck. It's also important to know that the school turns off the heat to all the dormitories, so everyone has to stay in like this one building. So, which I thought was not very well explained, because we see the students, like Angus, in the same living room as the teacher and the cafeteria lady. So I don't know, that felt awkward. But anyway, they're watching the Newlywed Game a couple of times. And I thought those interactions worked really well. Because I think they showed that Paul is not as awkward as he maybe thinks he is. Like, he can interact with someone who's very different from him. She seems to like him. She talks to him in a very honest way, and he doesn't seem to react negatively. So those worked really well. But yeah, because then when it's time for them to leave Boston, we see that, and this is after Paul and Angus go visit the psychiatric hospital. They've just had dinner at a fancy restaurant. And then Mary just pops up, and she says, oh, I'm not hungry, I already ate. And they have a weird scene where, like, they want to order Cherry's Jubilee, but the server won't let Angus have it because it has alcohol. That all felt weird, and I don't know why Mary was even there, because as the audience, we already know that they have to pick her ass up to take her back to school.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
It seemed weird.
It seemed weird, as does the Angus absconding from a screening of Little Big Man to get away to see his father without telling Paul, when he could have just said, like, hey, I lied, my dad's alive, he's in a psych ward.
And Paul even says, you could, like, if you could have just told me that, like, of course we can go see your dad. I also thought that seemed weird. I think the purpose of that was to make the audience think, oh, see, Angus is a delinquent, like, you can't trust him.
To keep us ambiguous about his intention.
But I didn't really think I needed that. I already felt like, yeah, he's a teenager, he's rebellious, but he's also smart, and he seems to like Paul. I didn't need to be made to feel like, oh, here he is doing another rebellious thing.
I agree.
We do see that Paul likes to give the book Meditations by
Marcus Aurelius
as a gift, which I thought was funny. Because there's a scene where he gives it to Angus and Mary, and they seem disappointed. But then he tells Mary, like, don't worry, he got her another gift, which is some alcohol.
Some brown liquor.
Because they like to drink. Whiskey, I believe. Oh my gosh, when they're in Boston. So Boston is where we really learn a lot about both Angus and Paul. Because in Boston, while they're at like this outdoor bookstore and a prostitute approaches Paul, which I thought was a really funny scene. And then Angus and Paul bump into a fellow student of Paul's at Harvard who he hasn't seen in 30 years. And it's clear to Angus that Paul doesn't want to tell this guy what he's doing now. So then I thought it was a really funny scene when Angus makes up this lie about how Paul is writing a book about like ancient cameras. I thought that was very well
Camera
done.
Obscura.
Yes. Then they end up at a liquor store because Paul's upset and he needs some liquor. And that's when we find out that Paul did go to Harvard, but he got kicked out for basically like running over this boy with his car. For good reason.
He has a good reason, yeah.
But I thought that was all very well done. But then it also that's also where we learned that the previous principal of the school liked Paul and gave him his job, knowing that he didn't graduate from Harvard, knowing that he didn't have the proper credentials, which explains why Paul feels like he can't leave Barton. But the problem with that is, we find out the current principal who's retaliating against Paul doesn't like him. And he even says like, like you've failed all these students, no one likes you. But then in the end fires him for this thing that I feel like he could have fired him a long time ago for.
Yeah.
That felt crunchy to me.
The current principal is also an ex-student.
A former student of Paul's.
That he didn't like as a student either. So, I mean, once a clear portrait comes together of Paul, it's like, oh, you feel for this man.
We learn in Boston that Angus is taking Librium for like it's a psych med for depression. And then Paul confronts Angus, and Angus doesn't react negatively. He just like blows it off. And then we see Paul go into his accessories bag, and he has the same medication. So they're both depressed. I thought that was a nicely done scene.
Yes.
It wasn't overly, like I like that they didn't make it a thing. Something that they do make a thing of, though, is because Paul has a lazy eye, there's a point where Angus asks him, like, which eye do I look at? Like, I'm never quite sure. And Paul doesn't answer him. But at the very end, he tells Angus, like, you look in this particular eye. I thought that was a sweet moment. And that was more of the sentimentality that made sense to me.
Sure. Not
them kind of crying and giving that very, like, masculine, strong handshake. But here we are.
So, yeah, let's talk about that. I think that it almost has a perfect ending at a point where it's New Year's Eve. And the four of them, it's Danny the custodian, Mary and Paul and Angus watching the ball drop. And Angus has found a firecracker and they decide to light it off in the kitchen.
It's bigger than a firecracker, though. It looks like a little stick of dynamite.
Cherry bomb.
And at first, Paul says, no, we're not lighting fireworks in the house. But then after the ball drops, Paul goes, but we can't light it in the kitchen. So then we get a long shot through some windows of Paul lighting this mini stick of dynamite, and then we hear it explode. I agree.
I could have ended there.
Because up to that point, I was thinking I would have given this movie 4.5 out of 5. Like, I thought it was nearly perfect. But then we get an extra, 20 minutes.
It's not quite 20 minutes,
No,
but it's where we get the firing. And again, like I alluded to earlier, I can see why Payne wanted to show at least two of them moving on. I think Mary gets kind of left in the dust, which
Yes.
all of that could have been avoided if we had ended a little bit earlier.
Yeah. It's when Paul gets fired, he tells the principal that you are penis cancer in human form. That was funny. Then, as Paul's packing up his housing on campus to leave, Mary shows up to say goodbye. She also explains we can assume that she did not get in trouble because we do see her being called to the principal's office, but it seems like her job is preserved. And then she gives Paul a blank journal to write in because earlier in the film he had mentioned that he might want to write a book, but he says he wants to write a monograph, which I guess is like a shorter book.
Yeah.
I thought that was sweet.
It's sweet, but then we also don't give her anything to do. She's
No.
like, I'm gonna stay at this job that's kind of dead end, that's gonna remind me of my son all the time, and save up money to help my nephew,
Who's not even born yet.
or if it's a boy, is gonna have my son's middle name. It's like, I don't understand why we couldn't have given her a moment, if not to decide she doesn't know what she wants to do with her life or is pondering what she wants to do with her life based on her son dying, who she was kind of living for previously. I don't know. It's curious to why we didn't get that for her.
Earlier in the film, we see the principal received like a nice bottle of like Remy Martin cognac from one of the parents of the school. So at the end of the film, we see that Paul has taken that bottle of cognac. And the final shot is when Paul, because he has his raggedy ass car with the trailer, the U-Haul attached, as he's pulling out of the school grounds, he takes a swig of that cognac and spits it out. I liked that.
Sure. Again, that's not that there aren't like nice touches in that last segment. Although Tate Donovan shows up as the stepdad.
Oh, do I know who that is?
You've seen him and stuff. I always think of the movie Love Potion No. 9 with Sandra Bullock, but he's been around a while.
Dominic Sessa, this is his first movie role?
Yeah, and this film kind of does for him what the Descendants did for Shailene Woodley.
I really liked him in this movie. I thought he did a great job.
Yeah.
I like his manner of speech. He reminds me if you mix Rami Malek and Tilda Swinton.
Finn, or what's the kid from Stranger Things?
Or, yeah, that kid.
Finn
yeah.
Wolfhard.
Yeah, he's pretty gangly. But I
Yeah.
thought he did a fantastic job.
He does it's you want to spend the time with these people.
Well, I liked it enough that I would watch another Paul Giamatti movie.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
There's probably some Alexander Payne you should catch up on, but like about Schmidt, or
Is that with Steve Carell?
that's with Jack Nicholson and a naked Kathy Bates.
What's the movie with Steve Carell and Octavia Spencer is talking like the lobster?
That's a terrible movie. That's Dinner with Schmucks, which is
Oh, that's what about Schmidt I thought was Dinner with Schmucks.
and that's a remake of a French film called The Dinner Game, I believe. But Octavia's like 2-second part is the only reason to watch that movie.
We need to end this video. What would you give this movie?
3.5.
I would give it 3.5 out of 5 as well. Hit the thanks button, listen to our podcast. Bye.